So the rulers of the Christian kingdom of Abyssinia, mostly located in the Ethiopian highlands, had already had contact with the European monarchs of the Middle Ages. Embassies were sent and received from both sides, with Portugal, the Vatican, and even Russia having the oldest ties to Ethiopia. So in the 19th century, this mutual awareness became even more formalized. So in 1841, 2 years after the installation of the British in Aden, a treaty was first signed, or the first treaty was concluded between the British and the rulers of the present-day state of Ethiopia. However, by the late 19th century, Europeans were kind of hesitant to recognize Ethiopia as a sovereign member of the family of nations. To use a more contemporary term, or basically a white state that wasn't colonized, a state that was not colonized yet, was still civilized, I guess. During this period, so you got to remember, so during this period where Africans were generally regarded by European politicians and even academics to be a place of the uncivilized and the uncivilized people, Ethiopian rulers, despite their Christian faith, found it kind of challenging to gain a place where their country would actually be at the table of the civilized states. Still in 1884, Ethiopia's emperor and future Ningista Nagasta, Menelik II, from 1844 to 1913, signed a treaty with the British over their respective spheres of influence in the Upper Nile region. So in 1889, Menelik actually concluded a treaty of friendship, commerce, and even meat with the Italians, the Treaty of Walaka, or Toraio de Lucelle. Torataio de Lucelle. Oh, there we go. So considering this process with the Ethiopian European reapproachment and Menelik's own expansionist agenda, historians actually speak of Ethiopia and Ethiopian success to have actively participated as the only African state in the partitioning of the continent. Menelik still saw himself as a monarch and even equal and with equal standing to his European brothers though. However, when the Italians actually interpreted the Treaty of Walaka to have established an Italian protectorate over the Ethiopians, an interpretation which Menelik actually disputed. So when in 1896 the Italians felt strong enough to compel the rebelling protectorate into their colonial order, Emperor Menelik beat General Ossetti Baretti in the Battle of Adwa on the 1st of March 1896. Oh, there we go. I was stuck in the Cold War, sorry guys. So following the victory, the treaty with the Italians recognizing Ethiopian sovereignty and annulling the Treaty of Walaka was actually done with. Menelik actually followed a non-committal foreign policy from then on. His goal was actually to strengthen the sovereignty of his state, with the principle of government of the ministers was actually introduced in 1905 and 1906, and to use the competition of his European neighbors, such as Italy, Great Britain, and even France, to Ethiopia's advantage. Subsequently, Britain, Italy, France, Belgium, Russia, the United States of America, Germany, and even later the Ottoman Empire, set up legislations in the new capital of Addis Ababa. From then on, Ethiopia was on the map for international politics, and even Germany in particular tried to increase its political and even their economic influence during the decades between 1914 and leading up to 1914. So in 1907, an Ethiopian mission actually visited Budapest, Vienna, and even Berlin. So war against Italy seemed in Ethiopia's best interest, and therefore joining the wars on the side of the Allies was actually seriously considered in Addis Ababa. Following the death of Emperor Menelik II in 1913, Crown Prince and Regent Luji Lucia assumed power, while opposing political circles in Addis Ababa with different preferences regarding the European powers. Struggles for influence or even actually aiming to replace Luji Lucia would actually start right now. So when war seemed imminent in July 1914, it also seemed likely that the French and the British legates would actually outmaneuver their German counterparts and successfully convince the Crown Prince in supporting the Allies. Rumors had already spread that the Ethiopians would join the Allies' war effort. So out of their own interest in finally gaining access to that sweet, sweet Red Sea, at the expense of the Italians in Eritrea. Oh boy, on a hot spot later. Provided that the French and the British would actually declare war on Italy, since in 1882 diplomatic ties to the Central Powers by the virtue of the Triple Alliance was actually gratified, with Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy being the Triple Alliance, but due to having South Tyrol and Italy not being in the best place to protect Libya, Eritrea, and Somaliland, I think it's a time to switch the sides. So Ethiopia would attack Eritrea as the Italians had also feared, so that was probably another part in switching the sides. However, as previously when war actually broke out in Europe, Ethiopia's political elite attempted to follow a multilateral approach that fended off the pressures of discrimination against the citizens of the warring states. So this undeclared neutrality and the question of what rights and duties this would actually entail remained disputed between the foreign legates and even the Ethiopian government itself. So in retrospect and in respective of the fact that in 1914, Ethiopia had not yet ratified the Hague Convention of 1907, or the Hague Suggestions as most people would like to call it now. So the relative to the rights and the duties of neutral powers and persons in the case of war on land, 1907. Because Ethiopia is landlocked, so yeah. But for now. So for example, from August 1914, the Allied legates would actually exert pressure on the Ethiopian government so that the citizens of the Central Powers in Ethiopia would be barred from using the post office, telegraphs, Addis Ababa's only printing press, and even the railway line that would actually go through French Djibouti. Djibouti. So with the Italians joining the Allies in April 1915, all of the Ethiopian neighbors were involved in the war fighting Germany and its allies basically right next to it. So the Ottoman Empire with its Yemeni colony opposite the Red Sea, opposite side of the Red Sea, that'd be key later, I guess. Yeah, that'd be key later, remember that. So yeah, in 1915 and 1916, sympathies towards the Central Powers among a faction of the Ethiopians' leading political circles became more and more outspoken. So the Central Powers hoped that the new front against the British in Sudan and Somalia with the Dervishes, and not only that, within Libya with the, but within Libya from November 1915 with the Senussis, with the help of the Turkish support, had launched attacks upon the Anglo-Egyptian troops in, Egypt, the Suez Canal. So yet to this end, the Ethiopian support for the war was actually crucial, as it would hope that the Ethiopians would actually deliver weapons to the Senussis and Muhammad Abdullah Hassan, also known derogatorily in Europe as the Mad Mullah in Somalia. So the Central Powers promised that the Ethiopians not only that their own attacks would be on the Suez Canal, but also that the Ethiopians could, after the war, keep an outlet of the Red Sea at Lujia's request and what Lugia had conquered. The Germans even hoped that the Ethiopians could actually relieve Paul von Lettow-Vorderweg and his troops fighting in German East Africa. So the Allies were aware of Germany and even Turkey's plans to use the pan-Islamic conventions and even the convictions in the Arab world, and even beyond against their adversaries. So in June 1916, the Turkish consul Hamid Mazar Bey distributed leaflets in Addis Ababa. Wait, I thought they didn't have printing press. Which actually concluded that the interests of Islam in this country concur with those of the Abyssinian government. So there were actually rumors, possibly fueled by the Allied supporters and support, that the Crown Prince would actually convert or had already converted to Islam. Alright, so Lujia's affiliation with the Turkish Council and even the Muslim nobility in Harar, Ethiopia, but also beyond in Somalia, which became a grave concern for the British and even the French legates, whereas the Ethiopian Minister of War actually preferred a policy of neutrality. Lucia apparently gambled on the victory of the Central Powers though. So British diplomats around the world pressed for a more favorable attitude among the neutrals towards the Allied war effort, especially the British war effort, and having provisions and help for the Allied troops. For example, it would allow provisions, it would docks, shores, meat, be more favorable with giving grain to them and not Germany, stuff like that. So considering the Turkish-German attempts to get Ethiopia on their side, the Allied legates in Addis Ababa used their better access to power and connection and their power brokers in Ethiopia around Luge Lucia and his cousin Rastafari Mokone, later the future Haile Selassie I, Emperor of Ethiopia. Ah, Rastafari. I get it now. I get it now. You learn something new every day. But, so as both cousins could actually claim descendants from the Somalit line and the Somalit dynasty, they had already been in competition and competitors for the throne for years. But when Rastafari actually initiated a successful coup d'etat on the 26th of September 1916 against Luge Lucia, it was his turn. But be careful what you do, because stuff like this comes back to bite you, Haile Selassie. Anyway, the coup was supported by the Allies and justified with Lucia's alleged conversion to Islam. However, despite charges of the apostasy, the available evidence was in no way suggests a formal conversion or that Lucia actually gave up his Christian identity. Given the Allies' military dominance in the region by 1916, though, Rastafari actually considered the political leanings of his deposed crown prince brother, or cousin, towards Turkey and the Central Powers as suicidal in Ethiopia's independence and sovereignty. Subsequently, Luge Lucia was actually put under house arrest and, following his escape, put into prison. So under the new Empress, Queen of Kings, Nigisti Nagaste Zaduti, Empress of Ethiopia, a cousin to both Luge Lucia and the new heir apparent, Rastafari. There we go. Ethiopia remained neutral for the ongoing part of the war. I'm kind of siding with the Allies, but hold on. So the government consequently prohibited, in line with the Hague Convention, which they signed, the recruitment of Ethiopians into the Allied forces in 1917. Although if you wanted to go and fight in the African theater, which was only East Africa at the time, sure. So Ethiopian farmers were nevertheless allowed to sell their cattle and their meat to the meat factory in Eritrea, which was actually provisioned by the Italian army. Thank you. We're going to invade you in 1936. What did you say? I said thanks for the meat. Because, it's 1917. Oh man, these jokes are terrible. So when in May 1917, a small German party actually attempted on behalf of the German legation in Addis Ababa to cross the Red Sea in order to transport a message to the Turkish army, the French legates actually accused the Ethiopian government, after the Germans had been arrested in Djibouti, mind you, a flagrant violation de neutralité, or a flagrant violation of neutrality. Flagrant violation de neutralité. So anyway, in June 1917, the Ethiopians under Rastafari offered the Allies legates that the Ethiopians would break off relations with the Central Powers, but demanded delivery of the 16,000 modern rifles, machine guns, even artillery, and a couple of those planes look kinda nice, my brother. Sure. The Italian government wanted to try and get their hands on Ethiopia again even before Mussolini came into power though. However, convinced that the Allies and their allies that the neutral but friendly Ethiopia was more helpful than an additional but unnecessary brother-in-arms, who would make unwanted claims during the peace negotiations based on their strength and sovereignty, and the unwelcome sense of equality that would actually come along with this. So Ethiopia's offer was thus turned down and rejected. So in late 1918, the Ethiopian government congratulated the Allies on their victory, but the German legate in Addis Ababa was not closed down, actually remained pretty solid. So in May 1919, the Allies only provided a lukewarm welcome to the Abyssinian mission in Rome, Paris, and even London. France was actually more enthusiastic about Ethiopia though. So France would actually favor Ethiopia joining the League of Nations. However, Italy and even Britain were still hesitant to unequivocally grant and accept Ethiopian statehood as opposed to the setup, right? It was only until 1923 that the African state was actually admitted into the League of Nations, and here Ethiopia, it did not get any better for them. as they had to continue to struggle diplomatically to maintain their independence until 1936. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed that one. That one was actually a bit better. I think I could have been a bit louder, but that was actually pretty good. Anyway, guys, I might try one more time, but I think this is it. Anyway, getting better though. I don't want to be Mr. Perfect, but really I'm getting better. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed something. Hope you learned something. And I'll see you next time. Remember, if the Germans offer you something in East Africa, just say no.